Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'm going to play a little game of speculative political strategy. I'm going to do a little what if, because we've seen a phenomenon in the Canadian elections this week. It's not really been mentioned much in the media, but it was repeated in Britain a few years ago. A very predictable behaviour on the part of voters, which could potentially be exploited by Labour. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So this is a story essentially of fragmentation and polarisation of the vote in Britain. I'm going to use a couple of graphs to illustrate my point. Don't panic. I've disinfected all the maths in use here. The first one I've used before. It shows the combined percentage of the Labour and Conservative vote in every UK general election since 1979. So basically all the elections in my lifetime. Now, I need to explain a few things here in order to build up to this what-if game I promised. So you can see there has been a general trend downwards. That is, over decades, more and more people have opted to vote for a party outside of the big two. In other words, for a party that was not ultimately going to be running the government. This is a massive reason why first past the post is on its last legs. It needs to go and go quickly. First past the post only works where there are two options for voters. Any splitting of the vote risks the overall winners being those who are actually considered the worst option by the majority. It's an electoral system which gives voters, in some cases at least, the opposite of what they want. It also means that certain type of voter have a disproportionate say on policy, and those people are not necessarily the best informed or have the national interest at heart. The fragmentation of the vote is so bad that we are likely to enter a period of electoral instability where coalitions will again become the norm, only unlike in a representative system where those coalitions represent the majority of votes, that is not guaranteed with our system. So we could have a coalition that even combined represents less than half the vote. You know, we could still have governments who only win about a third of the votes, just two-party governments instead of one. Now, to avoid this, tactical voting is essential. Hence why, although the media never mention them when talking about how successful tactical voting has been, the movement forward producing advice such as stopthetories.vote and now stopreformuk.vote are essential. But then there was a spike in Britain in 2017. We had this general downward trend, then a spike in 2017. That general trend of fragmentation was thrown into full reverse. The vote polarised. Why? Because 2017 became a single issue election. Brexit dominated voting behaviour, with people feeling the need to prioritise it above everything else and choose which of the two main parties should handle the process. Ordinarily, elections cover multiple policy areas and some parties may be seen as stronger on some than others, especially as no political party can push strong messaging on more than like a few policy areas. So at least with their current outdated methods of campaigning, shall we say, meaning that some of those people who feel left out could find that a different party targets them more effectively. But in 2017, this all went out the window. Brexit was the key issue for a lot of voters and votes polarised. They split themselves between the two main parties in a way which had not happened in almost 40 years. The same was true in 2019. There was a slight reduction. That was essentially down to people not wanting to necessarily vote for the Tory Brexit, but not trusting Labour either. But 2024 was back to being a normal election. It was fought on the usual policies, a range of policies. Brexit was just one of them. And the result, the fragmentation trend picked up where it left off. It wasn't especially fragmented. It was actually just following that trend. At this point, it's worth looking at the situation over the same span of time in Canada. This time by combining the vote share of the Liberal Party and the Tories. Now, I will point out, the Tories have sort of changed. They began as the Progressive Conservatives, were then sort of taken over by their Reform Party in the 1990s and are now a nastier Conservative Party. But I'm treating them as the same party. They were the Tories before, they're the Tories now. In Canada, which also has a parliamentary first past the post system, there was no fragmentation trend. They also have multiple mainstream parties, but the combined vote of the top two has remained reasonably high. Where it collapsed in the 1990s, that was down to the Reform Party almost wiping the Tories out. It wasn't a case of votes spreading themselves out amongst various other parties. It was like a load of Tory votes just going to Reform. which is the sort of thing that could happen in Britain as well. However, there was a huge spike in polarisation at the election this year in Canada. And it was caused by the same pressure that led to polarisation of the vote in Britain in 2017 and to a slightly lesser extent 2019. The election became dominated by a single issue. In this case, which party should handle the threat of Donald Trump, who is openly talking about annexing Canada. So voters largely abandoned other parties to swing behind either the Liberal Party or the Tories. And despite the fact that the Liberal Party won and the Tory leader lost his seat, it wasn't actually with loads more votes than the Tories. Their vote share was actually very similar. Carney just won more effectively. He won seats by smaller margins, right? And this poses an interesting bit of strategic speculation. So, what if in Britain at the next election, or the one after, we have that election dominated by a single issue again? If the next general election takes place in 2028, sorry, it's Labour are talking about 2029, but that would run the full term. It's quite normal for a government to actually hold an election after 4 years, so that way, if they think they're on for a win, they hold it after 4 years, or if it looks a bit ropey, hold on for the last year and hope something happens. So it would be quite normal to expect the election in 2028. And you think to yourself, okay, so, and don't panic, by the way, it won't be Reform UK winning there. Labour have a lot of very popular policies which voters don't know about. They will know about them long before the election, even if the election's in 2028. However, let us imagine the scenario is in the polls, no one party looks like getting a high share of the vote from now on. That last year wasn't a flash in the pan. Remember, it was just a single data point on what has been a clear trend for decades. But what if the next general election, just for the sake of speculation, were on a single issue? What if, as would be normal, Labour don't hold the election in 2029, but they hold it in 2028? Let's say that Trump, because he would still be in office then, is just as polarising a figure in Britain as he is in Canada right now, where he will, as I say, still be in office, hopefully on his way out, because his stupid evil will have messed up his attempts at dictatorship, we will see. Or maybe Labour talk about changing the electoral system, or, wonder of wonders, joining the EU. That's probably more likely for the one after. But the question I want to pose is, if there were to be a dominant issue for a general election in the UK, and dominant enough to cause the same polarisation we've seen in both Britain and Canada in recent years, how would that vote polarise on the right? Because up until recently, the choice has been clear. For anyone using their general election vote to decide on the government, it has been either Labour or the Conservatives. Unless Reform UK fade away very badly in the next few years, there will be a third option. And although Reform do present vague policies designed to appeal those on the left, just as Boris Johnson did in 2019, they openly state they are a right-wing party, even though they claim to be centre-right rather than far-right. But if Labour made a future election about a key issue which would polarise people in support or opposition to this one dominant policy area, how would those opposed react? This would have to be an issue that terrifies the Tory media, because they would have to try and unite voters around a common banner to stop it. Which banner would they choose? The Conservatives, who are the default choice for government, but whose reputation is still likely to be in tatters, or Reform UK, who are seen as credible pretenders to the throne, but would be a massive wildcard. Get it wrong, and Labour would have their mandate for whatever policy it happened to be. In fact, joining the EU and reforming the electoral system combined would trigger blind panic in the Tory media. What would they do? Who would they recommend? Because if the right-wing vote, opposed to whatever policy, tried to polarise around a common banner, one of three things would happen. First, they would flock to the traditional Conservative vote and Reform UK would be obliterated. Second, they would flock to Reform UK, seen as the future, and the Conservatives would be obliterated. Or third, they wouldn't know what to do, split their vote and let Labour in through the middle. Of course, Labour could still win with the first two conditions, but definitely with the third. Would be fascinating. Could Labour make the next, or maybe the following election, about a single dominant issue in order to panic the right wing into destroying one of their champions? Personally, I think they would flock to the Conservatives. I think Farage is seen as too much of a mystery box. He's too vague on his policies and completely untested. I also think that if Reform control some councils after today, it's quite likely, I'm afraid, there will be examples of Reform UK failures. Nigel Farage is today saying, vote Reform UK to fix your council. We can hold him to that. Now, although, Reform UK failing at the council level won't be conclusive for a general election, it will sow enough doubt in the minds of voters. I think a single issue election with our current political scenario could be very bad news for Farage. Because if voters are going to crystallise around a single dominant issue, they will expect each party to present a clear, detailed and compelling policy for it. As I say, a party can only really get away with 4 or 5 key policies that there's plenty more in the manifesto, but that they keep parroting through the media. But if it's about one dominant issue, that's the one that will focus voters, and they'll go, well, what is your policy on this? They will want a clear, detailed and compelling policy. And Farage has spent a lifetime in politics avoiding clear and detailed. He wouldn't half show Prince Andrew how to sweat if that happened. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.